Welcome back to the Customer Marketing Summit. We're about to join another amazing talk, but just before we do, I wanted to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, speakers, and you, our wonderful audience, for making this event possible. Expert presentations and inspirational discussions on the agenda, you're in for a real treat today. Please ensure you are sharing your feedback and asking all questions in the comments section of the video, as our speakers will be answering them throughout their session. After the event, a great place to continue the conversation is in the Customer Marketing Slack channel. I'll be posting the sign up link regularly in the comments, so if you're not already involved, keep your eyes peeled and join the discussion. And remember, you can gain on-demand access to all of our exclusive footage with a PMA Pro membership or an Access All Areas pass. So with all this in mind, let's dive back in.
Kevin Lau is an Influitive Advocate Marketer of the Year award winner. He knows how to connect customer advocacy to business strategies and key metrics. He's been doing it for years at Marketo and Adobe, and you're going to find out how right now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making my session today, which is Meaningful Metrics That Matter, how to transform your customer programs into strategic assets that impact business growth and career momentum. A little bit about myself. My name is Kevin Lau, and I'm the Global Head of Customer Advocacy at Adobe. Outside of work, I like to create memes for fun. I'm a Comic-Con seeker, Marvel and Star Wars fanboy, as you can kind of tell from my background. And this topic I'm super passionate about because this, I think, is one of the things that is going to help you unlock true potential within your organization. It's the thing that's going to help you drive momentum, help you achieve headcount, budget, resources, the whole gamut. And so today's agenda is we're going to be talking a little bit more about what to measure, how to align your programs with leadership priorities, data, MarTech, integrations, all of that back end in the weeds stuff. If you're scared about it, we have some resources on how you can actually approach it and who to go to for some help. And then also kind of measuring your programs from A to Z and what does it ultimately look like? And then give you some actual visualization examples that we've been implementing now over the past couple of years to help you as you kind of think about how do you want to replicate and showcase your own program success. So with that being said, let's go ahead and straight into the information. And what I want to reiterate at the very beginning is that this whole journey in terms of measurement, reporting, creating dashboards, all of that is a process. It's a journey that's going to take time, effort, consistency, really deep collaboration with internal teams and resources to help you get to that finish line. But also just kind of know that this is a process that we've been exploring now for the better part of the past 3 to 4 years. And it sometimes may seem a little bit scary, and there's going to be those moments where you want to bang your head against the wall because you've hit some roadblocks. But I can reassure you that once you get down this path, this is going to ultimately help you get to where you need to be. And if you think about sort of your progression over the next couple of years, if you're looking for those promotions, you're looking to make a huge impact in your organization, this is where it ultimately starts. And these are the conversations we need to have. And holistically, as an industry, and I'm talking about customer marketing, this is the one area that I think we struggle with the most. Now, we always are good about creating relationships with customers. We can, get them to participate in a number of different programs. But when it comes to measurement and quantifying that in comparison to what our demand gen teams do in driving pipeline, this is where they're typically far ahead of anything that we've been able to accomplish. And there's also no surprise why many of these demand teams typically will get, sometimes 3 to 4 times the budget, the resourcing, et cetera, because they're able to show direct pipeline correlation into business outcomes that are going to drive sales and even retention in some cases. And so I think if you really think about it, most organizations, especially if you're in a SaaS company, 75% of their revenue is typically from recurring book of business. And it's a stark comparison point where we need to get a better job as far as thinking about how do we show and deliver impact. That's something that our CMOs, our executives care about. And it's finally time that we take kind of the reins and think about how do we better report that information so that we can drive the impact and help our teams get the resourcing that we need to accomplish. Because I really believe that customer retention is definitely much more valuable than new logos. And I'm not saying it's just one or the other. We definitely kind of support both angles. But just given the amount of support that we provide to customer success and other teams, there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to do this. And it really comes down to the question of how do we prove this holistically? And what I'm going to be showing you over the next couple slides or the next 20 or so minutes is essentially the process. And it's a 5-step process where it begins and ends with asking yourself the right questions. It's creating shared goals with leadership. It's being clear with what you want to measure. It's taking inventory of your programs that serve you and also thinking about things that no longer serve you. And then also being able to start small and then iterate as you go. So let's go ahead and dive into the first question, which is, what are those series of questions that you need to ask yourself, your team, and other stakeholders? Things like, what can we measure today that is easy to do? What are some things that are going to take, integrations or additional time or impact? And what's going to ultimately have the greatest impact when we had to think about our results in the next 12 years or 12 months from now? And what does our leadership care about? We talk about this, and we're going to talk a lot about this over the next couple slides. And where can we get their support, their help, their buy-in? Where does the data live? And in often cases, it does live in multiple places, whether it's with IT, finance, etc. And what teams can we partner with closely that's going to help move the needle and move us in the direction that we need to go towards? And how ultimately do we want to visualize that data when we're talking to our C-suite, our executives, and other stakeholders internally? So the second part of that whole process is just as we kind of alluded to, it's talking to the folks within marketing, sales, customer success, product, and support. And I'm giving you kind of the view front from Adobe specifically, but likely if you sit within a customer marketing team, you most likely sit within marketing or possibly even customer success. And what your CMO may actually think about is things around like pipeline influence, brand awareness, maybe retention as a metric that's going to drive growth within a company. From a sales standpoint, they're typically thinking about things like closing new deals, customer expansion, how can we get more customer stories that are going to feed the engine? And then from a customer success standpoint, it's also about value realization. It's like time to value, product maturity, and then also customer retention. And then from our product standpoint, value realization, customer feedback, business impact, and then also with support, it's support resolution, fixing those tickets quickly, case deflection, and value realization. And so with all those kind of big things being said, we had to think about internally, what is our North Star? What are the things that we want to be known for? And how do we create our strategic pillars aligned to the goals that we have with our other stakeholders internally? And so here at Adobe, we have our business or our team kind of broken up into a center of excellence around these 3 pillars. Now, it's all about how do we develop and execute programs aligned to the customer journey to drive adoption, advocacy, community, and ultimately create customers for life. And so from an adoption standpoint, it's about how do we create scalable customer programs, whether it's nurtures, in-product guides, events, etc., that's going to drive product maturity, value realization, and ensure that customers see success quickly. The time to value is fast. The second thing is community. It's being able to connect our customers around the world, let them connect with their peers, help answer their questions, drive product adoption, in a similar fashion, also value realization. And then the third pillar, which is all things advocacy, it's being able to expand programs to ignite and activate advocates, drive loyalty, and at the end of the day, evangelism for your product or brand or your service. And so when we had to think about kind of our North Stars, these are the things that we took into consideration that's going to touch across the 3 pillars that we have within customer marketing. So the first one is customer adoption score, or essentially your adoption score. And when we use the word score, you can almost think of it as very closely aligned to how lead scoring works, just on the flip side, to drive customer engagement. So moving people, further down the funnel from a regular customer into an engaged customer. And the adoption score really measures influence on feature and behavior usage and overall product maturity. Now, the community engagement score is measuring community membership and engagement influence based on members going into community, activating them, and driving discussions in your online forums and leaderboards. And then the last one, which is the advocate score, which is what we're going to spend probably the majority of the time today discussing. And that's measuring your customer programs against how it's driving impact and business revenue across new business to retention, et cetera. And so where we started, and I think it's helpful to give you kind of that landscape, back in 2018, 2017, right before we got acquired by Adobe, this was essentially kind of our program ecosystem. We ran programs from community to user groups to influitive instances, et cetera. And we use this as sort of a visual guide to let people know, these are the opportunities that our customers can be involved in. And also as a resource for our internal teams, so they understood, how do they position it to their stakeholders, to their customers, et cetera. Now, this is probably an easier way to kind of see it, but clearly it encompasses everything from community, which was powered by Khoros, our user groups, which then moved from LinkedIn and other channels and Salesforce communities to Bevy, Purple Slack, which is I mentioned as our influitive instance, customer references, which sat on RO Innovation and Upland Software, peer reviews, which were ran on Gartner, G2, and TrustRadius. Our Fearless 50 and our Adobe Champions are essentially kind of like our VIP brand ambassador programs. We ran our customer awards program for a number of years, and then our customer advisory board, as well as customer stories to drive impact across go-to-market and retention efforts. Now, through that acquisition, or through the process that we went from Marketo to now being part of Adobe and representing 10 plus different products and services across Adobe's Experience Cloud, there were some programs that we had to shed or move away from what our core mission was, and that was about customer retention at the end of the day. And there were also other teams that were kind of being charged with or tasked with kind of owning some of these areas, whether it's customer advisory boards or customer references. So this gives you kind of a sense of what is our program ecosystem now in 2022. And what I want to talk a little bit more about is how you could start to measure each of these things more concretely, as well as things that you guys may have in your current companies that we don't have today. But this gives you kind of another way, another lens to kind of think about it. So starting from the very beginning, from left to right out of the gate, what are some low-hanging fruit things that you can do today? Well, typically advocate growth is an easy thing to kind of measure because once you start a program, whether it's a reference program or a user group, you could actually literally count the number of members that are engaging your programs, track that quarter over quarter, year over year, and continue to multiply that and think about, how do I want to increase that number, to 15, 20%, each year. In community, we talked a little about this with the community engagement score, but there's also things you can look at, whether it's quarterly or yearly membership growth targets. You could also look at how it's actually deflecting support cases. And then with customer references, which is I think what most customer marketing teams do today, it's all about deal acceleration, pipeline influence, and being able to look at the number of completed references per quarter, and maybe also the average deal size per reference and how that's increasing or decreasing. Now with user groups, it tends to be a little bit more membership based and attendance driven. But you can, similar to advocate growth, you can look at the number of members that are growing, the chapters that are growing regionally as well as globally, and what does that attendance look like over time? Now with peer reviews, this is something that we started doing recently, but we actually take the contract dollar of whatever you spend with, let's say, G2 or TrustRadius, and then you divide that by the number of reviews per year, and that will actually give you your cost per review. So let's say, for example, you spend $75,000 on one of the contracts, and over the course of a year, you drove 500 new reviews. Well, you could actually see that that's actually driven about $150 per review, and this number will continue to change as you look at it year over year. And that's one area where they can measure that impact. The other way is through looking at how your reviews are actually influencing and driving demand, whether you use them on gated pages or other emails or other places, but that's another way you can look at peer reviews. Now, kind of keep going further. I talked a little bit about VIP programs. This could be, you can think of it as like our Fearless 50 or our Champions program. One way is you could look at membership influence to ARR. So annual recurring revenue is what it stands for, but also how those engaged members or champions or whoever they happen to be influence new business and retention efforts. So whether it's through references or something else. And then you could also look at customer stories. And so customer stories, it could be things around like viewership, form fills, how it's driving demand and pipeline. You can look at content syndication. You could even look at social engagement and how it's performing, on Twitter versus Facebook or LinkedIn, et cetera, and how it's maybe being used in active deal cycles that your sales teams are leveraging. And then you could actually point down what is the cost per asset every time you create a new piece of content, and what does that life cycle look like? And then from a reward standpoint, we're actually right in the middle of our awards program, the Experience Maker Awards. And so we're going through it actively to kind of track and measure the success. But another good way is just kind of year-over-year submission growth. We also look at the finals and winners and how that's influencing ARR. And then pipeline of new advocates that are created, as well as new stories that our teams can kind of mine as we kind of wrap up the awards program. And then moving on to kind of direct mail, this is everything from like swag for the campaigns that you run with some of your customers. And then from an adoption standpoint, it's looking at protected revenue, it's looking at in-product guidance and other things to drive engagement. And then the last one, which is influencing churn. And I would say this is probably the most valuable metric that most of us care about, because if we can actually look at accounts that have advocates and create that stickiness in those accounts versus accounts that may not have an advocate or a relationship, what is the propensity likely that we're actually able to reduce churn over time? And I'll give you some examples of what that actually can look like. But I show all this because eventually you may even get these asks from your management team or your bosses, and there's always a QBR that comes up that you need to present these data and metric pieces holistically. And yeah, it's great to be able to show one or two things here and there, but eventually if you want to get to a point where you're able to create dashboards or executive dashboards that your leadership can easily articulate the value that you bring to an organization, that's when it starts to unlock real potential. It drives demand, it drives career growth, it drives headcount, resources, et cetera, you name it. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit, what does that actually look like? And the first stage of it actually is focused on teams internally that you can start to partner with. Now, here at Adobe, there's primarily 4 teams that we work with closely to be able to put together these dashboards. It's marketing operations, it's sales ops, it's business and data analysts, and then there's finance. And I'll talk a little about each of the value that these teams bring. Now, with marketing operations, this is typically the teams that are helping to drive the campaigns. They're actually creating them, they're sending them out, they're creating the audiences as well for you. So you can see how it's very critical to have this team in your back pocket and working with you. From a sales operations standpoint, now these are the folks that know exactly when a deal closes from sales as well as customer success, whether it's cross-sell, upsell, new business, renewal, et cetera. And so they have the direct line of communication to those teams. And then the business and data analysts, these are the ones that are going to be able to help make clarity across all the chaos, whether it's like integrating data and solutions and whatnot into a comprehensive visual that you can then look and take back to and iterate as you go. And then the fourth group is finance. And the reason why finance is so critical is because these typically are the ones that have the cleanest data. They're the ones reporting out to the street, when you have, quarter that closed, or reporting out to the CEO. And so finance is one of the most strategic partners that you want to build a relationship with. Now, when it comes to actually building out the score, I'll give you one example of how this kind of looks like in our particular case. Now, we've built everything as in Marketo Engage is sort of like the backbone of our architecture, and feeding all the data, having integrations, the APIs, et cetera, built into this, and looking at data from Influitive, Khoros, SFDC, which is our CRM, RO innovation from reference standpoint, Bevy from user groups. Some of our programs don't live on a technology stack necessarily, and so we have to upload smart lists. And then we have Alice from some of our swag fulfillment. And so this is where we start to kind of feed this all into Marketo, which then pipes it out to Power BI, which is the dashboard visualization tool that we use. You'd also use Tableau or some other tool, but that's essentially kind of what it might look like. And before we actually show you some examples of some of the dashboards, I do want to call out a couple pitfalls and challenges. Number one, it could be around dirty data. Everyone has this. Every company I've been at, there's always some form of dirty data. There's also a data validation testing phase that you need to do. You also might have multiple instances of CRMs and Marketo or other marketing automation tools as well. You also might have some challenges about where does the data ultimately live and who is actually the clear owner, because this actually might sit within multiple teams, as I mentioned at the very beginning. And so these are conversations you need to think about or have as you're going through this journey. And then also, what's the integration process look like? If you can get an API, that's great, but not every technology or tool or service has this as a standalone offer. And so you might have to customize and build things to create that integration. So, I know that we're short on time, so I want to give you a couple different flavors of visuals that you can start to look at. One of them in particular, which I think is going to be the most powerful, most important for you, is developing an executive dashboard. Now, we use the word executive because this is something that can be shared across your different teams and stakeholders, whether it's your CMO to your CRO, et cetera. But we look at things like advocacy influence revenue. So actually looking at that holistically, whether it's by quarter or year up number. We also look at unique accounts, like what's our total world look like when we're influencing Marketo customers or Adobe Analytics, et cetera. And then how many unique advocates does that number represent? So we may be influencing 2,500, but there might be like 15,000 actual advocates. And then we also look at what is our actual penetration. So 78% of accounts have we engaged across, let's say, the Marketo ecosystem. And one thing I want to call out is that all this data, this is all DEMI data because we can't obviously share real world data, but this gives you a high level understanding and visual guide of some of the things that we look at when we report out to our teams and our stakeholders. And then the last one at the very top is average churn rate. So being actually able to measure our accounts that have advocates, this number on the left, which is 6%, that should always be the lower number. That's what you'd hope would be lower, versus the accounts that have no advocates at all, and that number being a lot larger. Once you can uncrack that, that is a gold mine of driving impact within your company. And then as you kind of look a little bit further, you can see we have it further segmented out by regions, by segments, whether it's growth, SMB, commercial, enterprise, and then what does that account makeup look like across each of those regions? And also what type of ARR is that driving? And so that we can kind of strategize and think about, okay, we need more coverage in Japan as an example, or we need more coverage in EMEA to drive more advocate engagement and growth. And then kind of moving along, there's another dashboard you can create around influencing churn rates. Again, it's very similar to that high level dashboard. These are all kind of drill downs you can go into in more detail and focus on a certain area. And ideally, if you build this out, then you can click on specifically like Americas and dive into that data to see what that's actually telling you. And then further, if you wanted to look at industry influence, you could take, maybe let's say it's the top 10 to 20 different industries that you play in, and you could think about what is the penetration you have across each one of those. So as an example, let's just take tech. There's 2,000 accounts. We have about 568 customers in there. So it's about a little bit over 25%, maybe 30% penetration. But on the flip side, professional services tends to be our lowest at 50 accounts. And so this gives you sort of like a target list if you want to approach almost an ABM strategy when you think about engaging your customers and where your teams need to focus in the upcoming fiscal year. You could dive into this further and look at advocate program distribution across, this is just an example across user groups, champions, experience makers, and community. Again, looking at sort of like that penetration and looking at the total ecosystem of how many customers are engaged there. And then also customer adoption dashboards. Now, this is a little bit different because it's actually looking at engagement versus unengagement across email campaigns, nurtures, or in product guidance, as well as events and webinars. So again, this is very critical. But as you can kind of see in the top right-hand corner, it shows you the overall metric of how it's driving influence and ARR for the business. Now, once you actually have this kind of completed, I will say this is probably what you're actually going to do. You're going to jump in a pile of cash and you're going to be super excited after you launch your first dashboard, because that's only how we felt when we did this. And we're still in that process of iterating as we go. But in kind of closing remarks, because I know we're running out of time, I want to just reiterate where to get started with all this stuff. It's, be clear with what you want to measure. Make sure that you actively work with your partners internally to be able to measure and see where they can add in additional value and resources. Keep in mind that you need to kind of align these priorities with your leadership team throughout the entire process and journey. And then also to realize that this is going to be an iterative process. You're never going to have one place where it just kind of finished and you're good to go. Even today, we're still building off of some stuff that we did 2 or 3 years ago. And so just know that it is going to take some time, but also some patience. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you for your time. If you have questions, I know we're going to go into Q&A very shortly, and we can talk about that right now. Also, in closing, I want to let you guys know that I've been working on a course in partnership with Product Marketing Alliance that I'm super excited about. This has been a passion project of mine for a number of years, and we're excited to actually be able to launch this very soon. And so we'll have details, there'll be links and whatnot, but this is essentially going to give you your guide from A to Z on how to create highly engaging customer programs, essentially a customer advocacy masterclass or certification that is going to give you all the tips and strategies of what I've learned over the past 12 plus years being in customer facing roles. So be on the lookout as we share more information about this in the coming months. But on to Q&A.